Hey everybody, here's my video on how to make a budget homemade concrete vibrating table or so for statuary. You can use it for a bunch of different things, obviously for plaster and stuff like that, not just for concrete settling. The purpose of it is to take your mother mold and give them a good shake so they have less chance of having air bubbles in the finish, so it brings the air bubbles to the bottom side because it's upside down. And will help get rid of them. So, trying to keep this in camera here. This is the original one. It's 16 inches by 16 inches. It's about probably an exact measurement. No point in saying about. It is 7.5 inches high, plus the feet. So it's overall it's 9 inches. This new one, I haven't painted it yet, but it's 18 by 20. The box is 9 inches high, and the overall height is 10.5 inches. Now, all these things are very, very simple things. Wooden plywood box, poured as plywood, not MDF or particle board or anything like that, because it's going to take the vibration. Everything is glued and screwed and nailed and reinforced that way. A lot of extra reinforcing to make sure that the vibration doesn't pull it apart over time. So put lots of screws. Don't be afraid to put them every few inches, that kind of thing. Put long screws as long as you can fit the foot, put through them. Bolts, double up your nuts on them so they lock in place, or lock washers, whatever. I'll show you on the bottom of these. They're just for us in North America, so 120 volt. I've just got a plug on this one. This one here has got a switch, so I can turn it on, and it does this little vibrating thing. You've noticed, so when I turn that on, you can still hear me talking. It's not loud at all. It hums about. I don't even know what that would hum like or something, but it's not not annoyingly loud at any means. Bear with me because I'm getting over a cold in my throat, so I'm a little hoarse and I cough here and there. I'll flip this up on their sides and I'll show you what I've done, and then I'll show you the steps that I did in building these. So I'm gonna bring the camera over closer in a second. So this has got a furnace motor in it. It's about a third horsepower. Most of the older furnaces have the same type of motor onto them. You don't need the DC motors with all the fancy speeds or anything, just a simple basic motor. The important thing on the motor is that it has a mounting bracket, a flat mounting bracket, so it can be screwed back to a surface. If it's got front screws that was mounted on, you got to get a little bit more creative. I'm going to show you something I've discovered for a smaller one. Like these will handle this. This has done 120 pounds on it without any problem. This one here is probably going to do double that or so. Like this is going to have a lot of weight capabilities. My plan is to keep this one on the floor for bigger things, and this one on the table for the smaller stuff. And then I've got a third, which I'll get to in a minute. What I've done is I've simply just taken the shaft out. This is not good for the motor by any means. Find an old used motor. Don't buy a new motor for this because over time it's going to ruin the motor. I've taken what's called a U-bolt, and there'll be pictures on the forum or so of each, so these things you get a better close-up. And I put a U-bolt over top of the shaft, put the flat plate that the U-bolt comes with, put some spacer washers on it, and basically took and put a whole lot of weight to the one side of the shaft, and I did the same on this side here. Just a Mickey Mouse of nuts and bolts, made sure they're on tight and stuff like that. And then I put some crazy glue. I didn't have any Loctite, but just over top of the thread so things didn't back off or anything like that. And that way when it starts, it gets a lot louder when it's not on its springs. It will vibrate all over the place. Now, the important thing is, so obviously you don't want your work and your table just walking away with it or so, that you put springs on the bottom. Now, when I built this one, I got these let me see if I can get the plastic thing off and show you the springs that are on this one. I'm going to bring the camera closer here so I can do a little shaky wakey here. So the springs on this are more flexible. I can bend that with my hand. So this I can't with my finger. I can get it maybe 30% in. So this, like I said, I've had 120 pounds on this and not had it ever come close to bottoming out. And I put these little rubber feet on just for, I don't know, I don't even know if there's a purpose to having them onto it, to be honest with you. It doesn't slide around or anything. Of course, I take it off with one hand, I can't put it back on. The bigger model, I've used these things. Now, finding springs, these are compression springs, is not easy. I've discovered this. Unless you happen to have the spring warehouse next to your house, you're going to have a tough time finding springs. So what I did is I looked everywhere in the city around us and online, and I discovered that online you need to have a military degree with NASA to get the information it needs to order a spring. A lot of times you look at Amazon, it looks like this big hunk of spring into something that would find you in your pen or something the size of your finger or something like that. These need to be pretty robust. This is 1.5 inches in diameter. The thickness of the coil is probably 1/4 inch. The overall height of this is 2.5 inches is what I've cut. These ones came 2.5 inches. These ones here, I cut them down to 2.5 inches. Because here's the story. I stumbled across something that they sell in the stores that everyone will probably be able to readily find to be able to source these easily. And the secret is porch swing springs. So when people build a porch swing and they have it hanging from their rafters or their frame that they build, they put these springs that have these steel things that go through. And again, there'll be pictures on the forum to show you how that what they look like, and a link from one of the stores online or so that where I got it from. Not a link, but a picture of the page. It's about $32 for two. They come in a pair, so you get the two. But I cut them in half because they're technically 5 inches long, so I got my 2.5. So I got 4 spring sets for the 4 corners out of one package for $32. In Canada, to me that's ridiculous for a spring that's not stainless steel or anything fancy, but it was a lot better than when I bought these ones, and I paid almost $15 a spring for them, times 4, which was, it adds up $60 for the springs. That was probably my most expensive part of it. The motors, like I said, find someone who's getting rid of their furnace, you'll get a motor like that. This one here is about 1/4 horsepower. This came off an old air pump, old air compressor for a gas station air pump. Then I'm going to show you something here on the bench. I just stumbled across this. Now, long story short, I got a wood lathe, used one. The guy, I just bought it. The guy was selling a bunch of stuff from his, I guess his family's estate or whatever, and he had a scroll saw. So, the scroll saws, they have the table and the arm goes up and down, the little blade goes, because a lot of people call it jigsaws and scroll saws and reciprocating saws, and they mix them all up. But anyways, again, there'll be a picture on there, so what I'm referring to with that. I had an old beat up one from my dad's that was this tin little thing, but it had a good motor on it. So I never got rid of it, but I never really used it. So when I got the lathe, the guy had one of those and he sold it to me for $5, which was like a bonus deal for me. So I kept that one, kept it intact, but then I took apart the one that I had from my dad. And my dad's one or so, the motor was a really impressive little motor. There's only maybe a 1/10 of a horsepower or 1/8 of a horsepower. It's a tiny little thing. But what they have, when the arms go up and down on them, they have a counterbalance on the motor, and that counterbalance keeps the vibration in sync, so the tool doesn't bounce around over your workbench. But at the same time, that tool will give you the ability to have a really nice vibrating unit. Now this has got a built-in switch and everything onto it, or so, which you'd have to obviously leave on and then have a different cord. But I'll plug this in my hand here, and you'll see what it does. I think it's got quite the vibration off of it. And that could easily be mounted underneath a wooden box. I wouldn't go on to anything big, but if you had like 50-pound items and that size or smaller, this would vibrate the air bubbles without any effort at all. The only downside is that the mounting holes are on the front of this, so you'd have to take a piece of steel and drill out a hole and drill out the 3 holes and have it come down and bend it under and screw it on. So you'd have to make your own little metal bracket for this. You wouldn't be able to do it out of wood or anything. It'd have to be steel to do that. So that part gets a little bit more complicated. you probably could just take this whole thing and clamp it down to the wood. The only problem is if it ever slipped off of cable ties or clamps or anything, then the risk of it getting caught up in the cam or so are a lot more riskier. But realistically, scroll saws, if you look on Craigslist in the States and Kijiji in Canada and whatever clearance places you can find anywhere in the world, you're probably going to find scroll saws for dirt cheap. Because usually I see them up for even sold for $50, $40. You don't care what condition they're in. You just care that the motor is on. Don't tell the buyer that. Tell them you got to fix it all up and get an even better deal. You might get it for $25 if they're asking for $50. I got this for $5 because that's all the cash I had left on me after buying the lathe off of them. So he sold it to me. Well, the bigger one before I took this one off my dad's. But that's a really simple way to have the cam system, a small one. This one's got the switch, the safety switches off. This was off a company called Champion, I think it was. Obviously a very old machine, but cool way to do the motors on them. So coming back to the construction of these, what I've done, like I said, it's got to be plywood. You can't use particle board MDF. So this is 3/4 inch regular construction grade plywood on the small one. This is just leftover wood that I had from another project. This is the Baltic birch. It's got the multiple laminated levels, so there's probably 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, probably about 12 levels. It's 1/2 inch thick, so it's not as thick as this one, but it's got a lot more strength because of the layers. And what I've done is basically, let me sit this down. I've taken and I built a box, and then I put the lid onto the top of the box. So what I'm saying is that the lid doesn't overhang, but it sits on all the sides. The sides are the other way, so everything is pushing down on its layers in the way it's built. I know that sounds really complicated, but basically build a wooden box with a lid. That's the whole thing in a nutshell. On the inside of the box, take some 1x2s. You see all the 1x2s in the corners here going up and down here? Go around the whole frame with that. Problem solved. Screwed it, nailed it, everything you needed to be in place. Motor mounting. I doubled up, because this was only a 1/2 inch, I doubled up the thickness of the base. I had an extra scrap piece that's a little bit wider than the motor, and I ran it because I'd show you up close, but it's black on black, so you're never going to see it anyways with the camera. And then I put bolts through from the surface and down onto the bottom of it. It weighs probably about 60 pounds. It's not easy to lift. And the bolts for the nuts and bolts that go through for the motor mount, I took a spade bit and I just drilled down a little bit so they sit flush, or almost flush in this case. And then I tightened the bolts down and I doubled up the nuts on the bottom so they don't vibrate and back off. I locked them against each other. I'm not going into all the details on how to cut the wood and the measurements and stuff like that, because it really comes down to what you want to build. I wouldn't go any bigger than this. Like if you get into something you're going to do a bench, I do benches on these. I let it overhang. I got my bench form is enough to support the bench from end to end and put it in the middle. I give it a shake. A lot of times all I have to do is put it on and give it a shake. This one here is a lot stiffer. It doesn't wobble anywhere near as much on its own. I can actually vibrate stuff in with this by just sitting it down, putting the thing on top of it, and I could just give it a wiggle, and away it goes like that. This one I don't need to do that. Now I'll plug this one in, the bigger one. Plug. So you can see it moving around. Enough of the noise. That one's a lot louder because I don't have those rubber feet. So there is an advantage to putting those little rubber feet on the bottom of it. What you will find is there's sort of hot spots and dead spots, areas from the motor. Try and keep the counterbalance of the motor as close to the center of the box as possible. This one I could have went probably another, I have another 2 inch, 3 inches I could have went. I may still move it over that extra little bit because your vibration center is where that off balance is. It's not the motor itself. I discovered that on this one here, And I forgot when I put this when I screwed this one on, so it's a lesson I'm just reminding myself of. Back on its side. Now, as far as the rubber, the springs and how to mount the springs, I didn't put screws and all that kind of stuff because these go through a lot of abuse. What I've taken is a 2x4. This is a plain 2x4 from another project that I left over. That's why it looks a lot sharper and cleaner than it is construction grade stuff, because that's all it is. I took a drill bit for drilling big holes, or so a hole saw bit, and I drilled a 1.5 inch diameter, and I drilled down probably about a half, 3/4 of an inch, almost halfway through the 2x4. And then I sat the whole thing completely on its back. Mind you, these were off, so these were just sitting on the bench on their back. I slide these all up, and you got to make sure that they're straight. If they're all, because the spring, when you cut the spring, or if you get springs, because one side's got the end and one doesn't, they're gonna sit at all funny angles and stuff like that. So you want to make sure that they're straight. Now I didn't bring them up to show you. These little magnet things that they use for welding that hold things straight. So I just sat it on the wood, pushed it up against the spring, and held it lined up, and I put them in place to hold the springs exactly where I wanted them. Now I did, to make sure, just for balance, is that the cut ends, or not the cut, but the end of the coil itself are all in the same position. So they're all on the outside of the thing. Because if one's on the inside, one's on the outside, it's going to throw it off kilter a little bit. And then what I did is I went to the dollar store. I bought 4 tubes. I think it was 5 tubes that I went through, 4.5 tubes of epoxy. The dollar store, Dollarama, sells them for like $2 for a tube instead of paying $10 a tube. Because you're going to go through about probably 3 ounces of it in total, 4 ounces when it's mixed up. And all I did is I poured it into this coil until it leaked over the top. So if you look at this very closely, you'll see the epoxy resin all over the top. And these are locked in place now. So they've got their springing ability, but they're secured in there, so they won't ever fall out. The other bench is done exactly the same way. That's how I put the springs on. That's how I cheated it. There's not enough vibration to ever crack that epoxy away from there. You can use any epoxy you want. Like if you've got epoxy hanging around, don't use silicone. Don't use any kind of premium stuff. Epoxy is the way to go for this. If you can get mounting things for the screws or whatever with mounting plates, go for it. But what I've seen in those, they usually vibrate and unscrew off of things that are moving like that. So I wouldn't go that route. And then like on the other one, if you can find feet, put the feet on it, because it just cuts back the noise a little bit. The big advantage for me on this one is that I got to keep this one on the floor, and that's going to give me, for my really heavy things that are a couple 100 pounds. Like I can stand on this. I'm a 300-pound man, and when I stand on it, so it shakes me. No question about that. If I was a 300-pound batch of cement, my bubbles would be coming to the top too. But you know, it's for a bigger purpose for this one. So you're motor-wise, you can really use the same size of motor. It's just change the amount of weights. If you need more vibration, add more weights to the motor, to the one side of the shaft. If you want less, take off some. Find out what a good balance is for what you need, and you should be good to go. The legs themselves, I just put the 2x4s in, and I put a couple of long screws in all the way around, locked it in place, secured it with glue. It's not just sitting there, they're all glued in place. So there's lots of adhesion to everything, so it can't move around. The cord itself, on this one, I will in time put a switch in line on the cord, but realistically it's safer to have the plug, because you can't bump it and accidentally turn it on. The switch is convenient to be able to add if you have a problem with your mix and all of a sudden you got to remix that a little bit or something like that. You can shut it off a lot quicker with a switch than you do with the plug, but that's the only convenience for it. It's actually safer to have it with a cord onto it. Now, speaking of safety, so this is a completely home-built, MacGyvered, as I call it, or so, my version of MacGyver product or so. There is no safety things to do with this. The motor can overheat, an arm can get, if someone reaches underneath when that's running, you can get very badly hurt or so, if not killed. It's an electrical device. You got wet cement, you got cords, GFI plugs, GFI outlets are a good idea for it. I'm not going to give you a whole big long spiel beyond that. It's just, if you try and build this the way I built these ones or so, it's at your own discretion. It's at your own risk. Don't come crying back to me that you did something wrong and you you hurt yourself or hurt somebody doing it. It is what it is. You gotta take it with a grain of salt. But this has worked phenomenally well. They're a lot quieter than the ones that you buy, the commercial ones. The commercial ones run, I've seen them anywhere from $2,000 and up. They've got the pneumatic or the electric vibrating solenoids that tick 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 as they go. They're really loud. So this way is a lot quieter, a lot nicer to work with. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I might have missed or so. I think that's pretty much it. I was going to assemble, I was going to actually screw it all together in front of everybody or so, but I think that doesn't really make any sense. If you're building molds for concrete, you've already got some mechanical skills to you, or you wouldn't be tackling this kind of a hobby in the first place. So building a wooden box and screwing a motor onto the inside of it shouldn't be too complicated. The motors really, I'll go over that one more time. You don't really need anything super powerful. Quarter horsepower, 3/8 horsepower at the absolute most is all you need for even a big machine. 1725 RPM. You don't need anything fast enough. If you get too fast of RPM or so, because the next step up is a 3400, so it's double the speed of 1725. The speed will cancel the vibration out on its own to a certain point, so it's gonna self defeat. And when you're vibrating cement, you don't want to vibrate them for long, just a few seconds, just to get the air bubbles. If you over vibrate them, you can remove any air entraining in the concrete, and that means in colder climates, your cement's not going to be as strong to handle the winter months. So, like I said, furnace motors, old pump motors, whether the capacitors start or not, that doesn't matter. Stay with voltage if you're in Canada and the States. 120 volts is a lot easier to work with for something like this. If you're over in Europe, everything's 220. So then, I'm not sure what the source for motors for you, because I'm not sure exactly the setup you guys have got for motors in furnaces and stuff like that. But extra, old tools, the clearance, the classified ads, old drill presses, they're always going cheap. There's so many people getting rid of them. The scroll saws. Even an old bandsaw, so you get a small tabletop, the benchtop version of all those tools. I stay away from grinders. Grinders are too fast. They're usually the 3,000 RPM. Motors all have a nameplate. They'll all tell you their voltage and their horsepower and their speed on them, so you can check things. But pretty much, if you go with a drill press or a bandsaw might be a faster one on some of them, but the drill press and the scroll saws are going to be the slower ones, and you're going to get them cheap because let's face it, not too many people are got wood shops anymore and building things. Everyone wants to buy things pre-made and pre-done. The era of every house having a garage with a workshop in it are long gone these days. So you can find tools from old estates being sold off cheap garage sales, that type of thing. It's a great source for the thing. The spring, like I said, the porch springs, that was a good find for this. This is more heavy duty, so you find some lighter things. That would be my first thing I would do find your springs. Because if you find a motor, you find a box, and you can't find the springs, you're going to be really frustrated that you just can't go out and build it. You don't want to build it, and without the springs, it doesn't work. Foam pucks and rubber pucks and stuff like that underneath or so, realistically, are probably just going to slide across. They're just going to vibrate across the floor. The springs are really what makes the huge difference in the way this runs. You can leave these longer too. Like these ones were stiffer. If I would have left them longer, they'd have a little bit more play. But like I said, I'm only using this one for the heavy builds where I got the hiccups. Anyways, that's it for tonight. Have a good night, folks.